How did your crazy ex become your crazy ex? Oh, I had one mega crazy ex. This girl was 5 kinds of faked in the head and needed to be locked the fuck up. Point first, she had a kid. I didn't doubt that. I saw her stretch marks, not a big deal. She claimed the kid had been kidnapped by the baby daddy and disappeared. Okay, stranger things have happened. Point things started not adding up soon. She was a pathological liar. Started with I make $60 hour in the military, which I knew was bullshit for her rank, since my mom was a higher rank than she was and made far less than that. Point she stole my car one night, and by the time the cops got there she was already back and claimed innocence, and the cops threatened to arrest me for making a false report. Point then she tried playing the ultimate psycho card and said she'd had a call saying her kid/daddy had been in a wreck in Canada and the kid was dead. At first, I wasn't sure to call BS on that or not. 2 days later she downed a bottle of sleeping pills with a full bottle of vodka. Point while she was in the hospital, I did some digging and found out that she and her husband got a divorce and he was awarded custody due to her being a complete nutbag. I noped the fuck out of there as fast as I could. I told her after 3 years of dating that I was actually a war refugee from Chechnya. She just knew I was from Russia, nothing more, and had seen a lot of horrible things during my childhood. I saw people be executed, bombs exploding, people dying slowly of gangrene, dodging snipers etc. Point never really told anybody this in my life. Since I came to America, I told her, because I was pretty sure I wanted to spend my future with her. I told her it was a massive deal that I told her this in the first place, because I hadn't ever told anyone. She left me right afterwards because she assumed I was crazy or mentally damaged from all the shit I went through. She said she didn't want to date some scary war refugee. Point the worst part was that her parents, who I mostly communicated through because she refused to talk to me, believed it too. They said horrible things to me about it, saying I was a criminal, junkie, that I would end up beating her up. I'm just another street Arab. I'm Azeri, not Arab. They basically put their foot down and said I could never date someone like their daughter. One of the worst weeks of my life. Really made me lose faith in long-term relationships. Girls edit. For all those curious, it wasn't a immediate thing. She always found me sketchy in a way because I was from the bad part of Brooklyn and she knew I had a history with hard drugs in my teens. Even after I came to America, she was scared of that stuff. She wouldn't go to certain bars and clubs that had a certain type of person. She preferred yuppie bars. She came from white, upper class suburbs, so right there it was a major divide in how we grew up. Apparently that divide made her really uncomfortable, like she couldn't relate to me, and finding out I'm a war refugee just was the last straw for her. I tried to end things several times and always got guilt tripped into taking him back. When I finally told him I was ending it for good, he asked if we could still be friends. I said of course we could. I was 17 years old, naive, and did not yet understand how complicated staying friends is. A few days later he invited me to his house to play Guitar Hero as friends. Of course, I thought it would be fine because his other friend was going to be there too. Like I said, naive, or stupid, or both. When I got to his house he had a drink in his hand. Red flag number 1. In the year I had dated him, he had never had a drink. As he drank more, he began asking me to stay over one last time and begging him to give him one last kiss. For obvious reasons, I became incredibly uncomfortable and told him I was leaving. He followed me up the stairs and cornered me in the entranceway, grabbing at my wrists, trying to force them to my sides and kiss me, refusing to let me leave. He was crying. I was screaming and crying. His friend was yelling at him to let me go. I managed to take out my cell phone and call my mom, but he yanked it out of my hands before I could say anything to her. Luckily, she heard me screaming before he hung up, got in her car, and hauled ass to his place. With the help of his friend, I managed to get out of the house and into my mom's car. He stood in front of it, in bare feet, in the snow, but I think he realized my mom probably would have run him down. Not really, but she was definitely in defense mode because he got out of the way. That was just the beginning of months of bullshit, including a suicide attempt and various incidents of harassment. I was really messed up about it for a really long time. TLDR, he tried to forcibly keep me at his house after I broke up with him and made my life a living hell for months. Cat disappeared strange. Was a friendly cat. Upstairs neighbor with big dogs came down screaming that my ex had somehow convinced both dogs to jump out the window to their deaths. She attacked me with scissors and a knife. Different days. Blew some guy in his car outside of our apartment. Finally turned on her headrear and threw it in the shower with me. Takes a lot to piss me off. Edit. This has gotten more attention than I expected, so I should probably elaborate a bit. 2 disclaimers. I was young and stupid, and she was sexy as fuck. This doesn't excuse my not bugging out much sooner, but it might give you some insight into my frame of mind. The above is pretty much all in chronological order regarding the cat. Not really that unusual. He was an indoor-outdoor cat, so any number of things may have happened to him. A neighbor may have thought he was a stray and taken him in. He may have been hit by a car while he was out on a prowl. I have no idea. It's more of a in retrospect. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that crazy beach killed him thing. The dogs. Now that's much stranger. My ex hated those dogs. They were big and noisy and ran around the upstairs apartment playing all the time. As such, she started a bit of a war with upstairs neighbor who was herself pretty nuts. I stayed the fuck out of it. My ex had said several times that she was going to kill those faking dogs, but I passed it off as just being annoyed with the constant noise. Hell, I didn't like it either. But otherwise the apartment was great, so we weren't really too excited to find a new one. The incident, whatever it was, happened while I was at work. I came home to the crazy neighbor screaming at my crazy ex about how my ex somehow had coaxed the dogs to jump from the window. Now, my ex was very petite, and these were big dogs, so there was no way she could have broken into the neighbor's apartment and physically thrown the dogs from the window. I've owned a few dogs in my life, and no matter how stupid they are, they were never so dumb as to just fling themselves out a window. Now, I have no idea what the fuck actually happened, and to this day, all this happened like 20 years ago. I can't explain it at all. But at this point I did start looking at my ex from the corner of my eye, wondering. Attacking me with scissors, and later with a knife. Well, these incidents proved beyond a doubt that she was dangerous. But both happened in the heat of the moment, during arguments. As I mentioned earlier, she was quite petite, and I was much faster than her, so I had little trouble disarming her without really being in harm's way myself. I mean, it wasn't like she was going to just try to kill me in my sleep in cold blood, right? Yeah, I forgot to mention, there was another attack, where she tried to mace me in our apartment. Inside. Windows closed. I just backed up and raised one eyebrow, like what the fuck are you even doing? The mace just settled in a big cloud in the middle of the room, missing me entirely. This really made her mad. She charged in for another go with her can of mace. Straight into the cloud she just created. She dropped like a rock. I rolled my eyes. Okay, come on, let's get you to the bathroom and wash this out. The makeup sesh was great. But at this point the relationship was pretty much over. It was just a matter of actually, officially ending it, which neither of us really seemed to want to do. All of these things, of course, happened over a few years, and of course in the time between these instances, it was all normal boyfriend/girlfriend stuff. Shopping, vacations, laughter, dinners and talking about the future, and of course arguments and fights. Some her fault, some mine, most we were both to blame. It wasn't like it was 2 or 3 years of nothing but crazy 100% of the time. Relationships aren't that simple. Anyway, near the end we had both sort of stopped caring. That's when I caught her having sex with a guy in a car outside the apartment. That was the whelp, this is 100% done moment. It was failing before, but I had hopes we could still work though it or something. Like I said, I was young and stupid, and she was hot. But nah, done. So I set my mind and attention to finding a new place. I didn't even want to bother with fighting over the apartment. It wasn't that nice. I just wanted out. Oddly, we were getting along fine now. We had both accepted it, or so I thought. One day I come home before her and hop in the shower. The past several days had actually been great. Laughs, sex, cooking, like a normal couple. She comes home while I'm still in the shower, walks in the bathroom, turns on her hairdryer, and without a word, without emotion, just throws it in the shower with me. Just a dead-eyed stare. I pulled a faking Matrix slow motion action jump, arms out, water droplets slowly flying out in some sort of hyper-reality, as if, well, someone had just thrown a hairdryer in your shower. Probably yelled what the fuck. Then I got dressed and walked the fuck out. Came to get my things later with an army of friends. This thread is a few hours old, so I'm afraid this will get buried, but I've been meaning to get this off my chest for a while. As soon as I ended up with my current girlfriend, I quickly realized how I had been manipulated by my previous girlfriend. My ex-girlfriend, we dated for about 3 years in the end of high school, had horrible anger issues, self-diagnosed BPD, attachment problems, validation issues, motivation issues, and other delusions. The worst part about it was that I wasn't the one who had pulled the trigger on the breakup in the first place. And that's not to say I was perfect either. I lied and had become mentally disconnected from that relationship months prior to our relationship. She changed my personality so much that I still see flashes of her anger and malcontent in myself, and it scares me quite a bit. We found ourselves so engrossed in the idea of having a serious relationship that we beat each other to hell to keep it alive in any way we possibly could. She had attachment problems and had to have a boyfriend or she was unhappy. I thought throughout the entire relationship that she was far out of my league and I would never get anyone better, so I stayed. We both hung on to our horrible high school drama for so long that I feel there is a permanent mark on both of us because of it. What haunts me the most is the sweet bliss that came with the good times. When we weren't fighting, when we were getting along, things felt just perfect. When things were good, the stresses of life seemed to melt away. But when it was bad, it was nasty. We both were catty, we both were insulting, we both said horrible, intentionally hurtful things to each other. I hope that she's happier now. I know that I'm edit. I'm here to PM anyone that wants to. I didn't know that other people had such similar experiences. I'd love to talk. I have decided to meander out of the shadows for my first post. Apologies if my internet etiquette is lacking. I was 17. He was 20. We had broken up several times for various reasons. Mostly we just weren't right for one another. October, we finally break up for the last time. We live less than 10 minutes away from each other, so he drives by my house all the time, cause creep. December, he convinces me to meet him down the street from my house at a drugstore, just to talk. He starts crying about how he cheated on me, how sorry he is, and how he will never do it again. I wasn't 100% sure prior to his confession, only like 99.9999999%. Whatever, confirmation that I wasn't crazy feels nice. Me, well duh, of course you're never going to do it again. We're done. You're never going to get the opportunity to do that again. So I saunter over to my car like the bad as I am, feeling pretty good about myself. So what does he do? He chases after me and pushes me up against my car, kissing me violently. This guy's maybe 5 inches taller and double my weight, so there isn't a whole lot I can do to protest. He pinned my arms down by my side, thinking he can restrain me. Super rapper. But I know this guy, he thinks he's being super romantic. So what do? Exactly what every woman wants to do in this situation. I kicked him right where it hurts as hard as I could, got in my car, drive home as fast as I could, literally a 3-minute drive, and told my dad what happened. Dad stood outside my house, knowing full well that his hole is probably going to show up any minute. So what does my dad do? He very politely explains to his hole why he is never ever going to drive down our street or speak to me ever again. While holding a crowbar, or whatever that metal thing was. TLDRX confessed to cheating after we broke up, tried to Hollywood kiss me, kicked him in nuts. Dad threatens him. Did I do this right? Also, on phone, and it appears that formatting is not a thing when phoning. Seems like this is one of those days to reminisce about the crazy and cleanse it from my system, so here goes. He was always a little of the rails, but unfortunately I'm sorta into that and always have been. I just thought he was interesting, but I was only 16 then, and he was a few years older. I looked up to him. When his only real parent died, he snapped, and that was that. It was all downhill to crazy town from there. At first he got extremely into the Bible. So much so, and in such a warped way, that he started hitting me if I accidentally cursed. The day he found out I was pregnant, I cursed by mistake and he beat the crap out of me. Really hurt me for the first time. Eventually things got a lot worse. There were a million rules I had to follow every day to avoid beatings. Rules about food and clothing, no mixed materials, and personal/cleaning products. He thought chemicals caused all these insane problems, and if I used a chemical by mistake I would get beaten badly. He thought spirits spoke to him, and that God was showing him signs through random things such as the time on the clock or words/numbers here and there. I became a total shell of my former self. He isolated me from everyone and everything. I was so brainwashed and confused. After our daughter was born, he thought that my prolactin production was causing him to have physical problems that made him more effeminate, and also mental problems. So I started getting beaten and berated for breastfeeding or even sitting in the wrong chair or place. I was covered in bruises head to toe constantly. My head was so sore and full of lumps it hurt to lay it on my pillow every night. Everything that had ever been a part of my identity was taken away. I used to write, but I had to stop because the things I wrote about were stupid. I couldn't listen to my old music. I couldn't dress how I used to. I couldn't even have plastic baby toys for my daughter. Our house was basically empty because everything was unacceptable, and filthy because he wouldn't allow me to clean with anything but baking soda and vinegar, not even dishwashing liquid. He didn't have a job for years. He thought he was above every single job. We were so broke. It was like living in hell. Eventually I left somehow to live on my own. We were still together because it is very hard to break the control someone like that can have over you. He came to live with me a year later and stayed for another year and a half. The entire time he had another family in another town. They had a baby together and he tortured me with this other girl. He compared me to her constantly and she gave me no end of trouble. He almost killed me several times during that time. I was just waiting for death. Waiting for it to be over with. I started talking to a boy I knew from high school while he was on one of his trips to visit his other family, and he reminded me of everything that I used to be. It snapped me out of it a great deal. I put my foot down. I finally told my ex he could not come back to my house. I lived in fear for a long time, but I moved across the country with that boy from high school. We are engaged now and have a daughter. It has taken years, but I finally feel like my old self again. I couldn't be happier than I'm now, and it all seems surreal, like it was a long nightmare. TLDR. Literally, Psycho X had a secret family in another town, was basically a cult leader level religious crazy, and almost murdered me several times. Hey Reddit. Been getting more and more into this site and I really like it. Anyway, I figured I would post mine, since I was actually the crazy ex, or I became it. My first girlfriend and romantic relationship happened when I was in my late 20s. Finally, it seemed, after years of dates, no replies, and rejection, it seemed like the trend was finally broken. She was a work colleague of mine, and, despite my friends and family members' warning to not date someone at work, I did not abide. Since I was so taken and surprised someone would be interested in me, I thought she was one of the most beautiful women I have met in body and mind. She was dorky, energetic, and seemed to be very mature, especially considering my absolutely awful performances in the bedroom, mainly regarding duration during intercourse, which did get better with time and experience. We dated for a year and I finally felt such strong feelings for her. I remember waking up next to her and just smiling so much, feeling like I found someone who could inspire me and I could look up to and rely on. However, after a year a new guy started working in our company. He was a bicyclist, CrossFit, and pretty attractive guy, even by my notice. A bit after he joined I noticed she became more and more distant. We then got into a fight over her not wanting to go spend a weekend at my aunt's island, and then she hit me with the "can we talk" text soon after. Her delivery was quick and efficient. She said all the nice things: "I'm not ready for a long-term relationship. You are amazing. I need to focus on me and my career now," etc. I was so sad I was actually surprised. I thought we made up over the trip issue, but then bam, this happened. I didn't know what to do. I sat at my computer dumbfounded looking at cheeseburger cat pics trying to make sense of it. My mind was numb. At first, I thought she was genuine and we could just be friends. Nope. Within a week of dumping me, she was at lunch with the other guy. He was going over to her desk, and after a month they were leaving the office together. I cannot describe how much that hurts. I tried to get transferred. I tried to find another job. I tried to work from another location to no avail. And for 8 months straight I watched them together. In the halls, in the cafeteria, in the company gym. The all-time worst part was that she would look at me like I was some kind of monster. She saw me with such unending fear and disgust in her eyes it drove me a bit crazy. And crazy I did become. I started experimenting with steroids, weight gainer powder, heavy workouts, powerlifting, boxing, and self-harm, punching, belt whipping, and low-level cutting. Eventually the roids, supplements, and lifting bore fruit and I went from 6 feet 6 inches 195, 88 kilograms, to 295 pounds, 133 kilograms. However, as many know, roids and supplements spike testosterone, which can spike anger easily. And when you have someone who is in a crippling depression getting their heart broken every day for days, weeks, and months, they lose it. I lost it. I freaked out one night, Valentine's Day of all damn days, and drank a liter of vodka, and began yelling/screaming at everything. My best friend and roommate was terrified. Eventually I couldn't take it. I took some Tylenol to thin the blood, and walked into the bathroom with a knife, and cut open my left arm. I bled out for a bit, and, unbeknownst to me, my roommate did call the cops when he realized I was in the bathroom a bit too long and was silent. Even the crying stopped. The EMTs arrived and stabilized me. After that it was a hard few months of rehab at a psych ward and a lot of antidepressants, antipsychotics, and sleep aids once I got out and returned to work. She was still there, dumped the guy a bit after word got out I was in the hospital, and she began to see how big and utterly monstrous I became. Still worked out even in rehab, but sans the roids and supplements. I did not look at her with smiles and happiness anymore. There was only utter hatred and anger in my eyes. I honestly have never really recovered. She tried on multiple occasions to get me fired and poison the office against me. However, finally, I got another job and left the company I had been with for 6 years. TLDR, my ex left me for someone else, dated them in front of me. I took roids, got massive, and then tried to kill myself. Then became somewhat of an office monster that made everyone a bit uncomfortable, her most of all in the hallways. Wow, finally talking about that after a few years really feels good. Talked me into telling my entire family that we were pregnant. Made me even call my dad, whom I hadn't talked to in a good 5 years prior, and tell him about it. She had shared custody of her son, and I'd usually bring her to her house on Friday night so she could take care of things there, and her son's father would come and pick him up. That particular Friday was a few days after she made me tell my entire family and call my father as I stated above. I get home after dropping her off, and on my computer she's still signed into Facebook, and it just so happens that her messages to her father's son are still up. I didn't really think anything of it. I just assumed maybe she was telling him what time to meet her or whatnot. Well, boy was I wrong. She was actually asking him to set up an appointment for an abortion with Planned Parenthood, and asked him if she'd take him. That night he got his face destroyed. There was a lot of built-up tension between the two of us that mainly started on his end. He used to beat her, threatened to do so while me and her were together, threatened me as well, etc. And well, a week or so later she went through with the abortion. A week after that she contacts me telling me how sorry she is, and she wished she never did it, and wanted me back. No thank you. Crazy. One of my exes blew up at me, screaming and throwing things about in front of my 2-year-old daughter, who was so terrified she hid behind me while trembling. He was furious with me because I refused to put my daughter to bed earlier than usual so that we could spend some alone time together. After thoroughly terrifying the both of us, he storms out of the house and slams the door. But wait, there's more. He opens the door again to tell me, "You can tell your Air Force buddies they're a bunch of pussies. The Marines are real men. then proceeds to slam the door even harder. He was not a Marine point. As soon as I was sure he was not coming back, I called my daughter's grandmother to make arrangements for her immediate escorted flight back to California. I then make arrangements for myself and notified my boss that was moving back to California. I ended up staying at the hotel of the casino where I used to work because I got a pretty good discount. He somehow found me at a bar hanging out with a few of my friends. Are you coming home? No, I'm sorry, I know it won't happen again. You're right. It won't come home. No, is this the end? Yes, please. Don't know. My daughter comes first. You don't seem to understand that. I'm going home. I think I drank all through the night until I was sure he was at work. I needed to grab the rest of my things from his house. When I arrived, I thought I saw movement in the house. I cautiously walked in the house. As I look up, I see a cord attached to the ceiling fan, which is now teetering. I suddenly feel chills down my spine and then the pit of my stomach as I hear him crying and screaming. What are you doing here? I open the door a bit further to see he is at the top of the stairwell with the same colored cord around his neck. The end of the cord is frayed and is hanging about mid-torso. The cord is pulled taut around his neck, causing his face to turn bright red. He's screaming for me to leave. Eerily cool and blank, I watch him scream at me. It seems like it's happening in slow motion. I can't hear him, but I see him mouth the words "I love you." I suddenly snap out of it. Are you serious right now? You've got to be kidding me. Did you really just try to hang yourself with a cord from the faking ceiling fan? I'm surprised the damn thing didn't come out of the ceiling. He screams at me some more and threatens to kill himself another way. I tell him good luck with that as I remove myself from the house. I get in my car and drive about a block away before my conscience tells me I should call the cops. I beg and plead with the dispatcher to let me leave before the cops arrive. She tells me that I need to stay to make a statement. The cops arrive. He willingly come out of the house with his arms stretched out in front of him to be cuffed. He yells at me, "I hope you're happy. Look what you've done." Then proceeds to cry uncontrollably. As the cops set him in the back of the car, he tells me he loves me and that he's sorry. Point. That was my first crazy ex, but certainly not my craziest ex. When I was in art school, I became involved with a girl who was one of the most gifted painter/printmakers I'd ever seen. Everyone knew she was going places. Teachers unabashedly praised her in critiques. She was several years older than me, but I was so smitten it didn't matter. On our first date, we smoked weed, then salvia, then drank whiskey till we blacked out. Point. Unfortunately, it hardly stopped there. I quickly realized she had a drinking problem. Every day, she began drinking in the early afternoon. By nightfall, she was belligerent and often violent. Every night was a new horror, dragging her out of bars, breaking up a fight she'd started with a homeless person, finding her passed out on my porch in the early morning hours. Once, she even jumped out of my moving car after an argument. Point. I couldn't handle it. I cared about her, but I couldn't spend my life as a babysitter. Not now, but especially not at 21. I broke up with her sweetly one weekend. She was upset about it, but said she understood and hoped we'd still be friends. I agreed we could. Point. Monday rolled around, and I walked into my first class. You didn't see the artwork on the wall, did you? The first person to greet me asked. No, I said. You need to go look, said the friend. I sauntered back to the doorway and looked around. Hung on the wall opposite my classroom was a life-sized woodcut print of me, drowning. I was gasping for breath, fingers clutching nothing but water, more dead than alive. I have a deep fear of the ocean. I haven't been in a large body of water since I was 10. For a month, I was faced with the aspect of my own gruesome death. Everyone agreed it was beautifully done. And that's why you don't date people in art school, kids. This really doesn't even rate, but it's my story. Met this woman online back when that was fairly rare, 1994 or so, on an adult-oriented BBS. We start dating. One of the things we talked about was kids. I did not want kids, period, full stop. She said she also had no desire to have kids. Okay, let's date and make the 8-legged naked aardvark as often as we can. Flash forward 2 months. She comes over to my apartment and basically issues a list of demands. I need to quit my job, making fairly good money, enough to pay for all my needs and still have about $1.5k to put away for retirement every month, immediately if not sooner, and get a much better job making at least 3x what I was making. I needed to buy her a house in the Tony part of Connecticut immediately. She lived in Astoria, Queens, New York, and I lived in Lower Westchester County, New York. Like a 5-bedroom and airy nor some sheet. She wanted to get pregnant immediately with the first of our 10 children that she wanted to have by me. I left a U/dream box shaped cartoon cloud behind me as I got out of that, but it wasn't immediate. Took about 6 months. Crazy in the head, crazy in bed. She tried to use the broken typewriter excuse twice with me and didn't realize I'd forgotten to inform her that I'd already had a vasectomy. I personally have only ever had one ex, and we broke up on good terms. However, I do have first-hand experience dealing with a crazy ex. My friend May had an on-off relationship with her ex, Chris, for about 3 years. When they broke up they would alternate between who begs the other to come back, or whose friends get thrown in the middle. Anyways, they finally broke up for good, and May broke down completely. She stalked him, collected his hair from around her apartment, left reckless voice messages, and more. None of it worked. Chris was simply done. It took her a while to accept this, but 4 to 5 months later she calls me up to help her move his stuff out. It had been a while since anyone heard from Chris or about him, so I happily oblige. As we are moving stuff out I happen upon a black metal box that was tucked away in a corner. I go to open it, but May notices and yanks the box away with a manic look on her face. My curiosity is piqued. "What's in the box?" I say. Her eyes dart around as sweat begins to trickle down her brow. "What's in the box?" Her clear distress is starting to make my mind race now. Chris just up and disappeared. That never sat right with me. I never even saw him out anymore. "What's in the faking box?" May tries for the door, but I block her. "What's in the faking box, May?" She tries one more time, fails, and I take the box away. Heart pumping, I open it, and there it is, looking up at me, my faking holographic Charizard from 4th grade. I knew that Beach took it. He was a compulsive liar. Made up this whole story about having a best friend that died in combat in his arms. Would always mope around, stole money from his roommate, lied about trying to get a job, instead played video games all day. When I broke up with him, he made up this huge story about this guy from his past. Some years ago he was defending some girl, he beat him up and sent him to jail, supposedly. He was now out of jail and coming out for vengeance. He made up an anonymous blog with a really morbid username, getting into this character and saying he was going to come kill us both, using both of our full names and extensive details on our lives. During that time I was going to go to a concert by myself, and I literally thought someone would come out of nowhere and shoot me. Fearing death anywhere I went was a horrible experience. This whole time he was saying he was going to protect me, that I didn't have to worry, just feeding me lie after lie. I ended up telling him not to speak to me at all, and that I didn't want to associate with him, because I didn't want to die. His plan totally backfired on him. When I mentioned calling the police, he started panicking and said he'd resolve it with the guy's dad that he was allegedly close to. I blocked him and never heard from him again. Afterwards, I told my friends this story and they actually opened my eyes to see that everything was a lie. That's when all the puzzle pieces in the whole relationship stopped fitting, and I felt stupid for being with him. TLDR, a compulsive liar. He made up a whole other fake persona that wanted to kill us both. Lost her phone in the bar, again, because she was drunk, again. We get to my car, she's throwing a temper tantrum about it. Somehow leans down in the passenger seat so that her feet are up on the dashboard and proceeds to kick the windshield so hard that she shatters it. Get into the world's most insane argument on the way home where we both scream that we are broken up. Whilst the screaming, pull up to a red light. Then I get rear-ended by someone while sitting there. I get out of the car to inspect the damage, and the guy who rear-ended me flies in reverse for about 2 city blocks. While I'm staring and flooded with a variety of emotions, I notice my car, broken windshield and in a U-turn going past me after the offending party point. I'm standing in the middle of Chicago at 4 AM wondering what the hell just happened in my life when she comes back with the car, but the front bumper is hanging off. I asked her what happened and she can't remember / pretends she can't remember. I take her back to the apartment and tell her to get out. She refuses, insisting that she has to use the bathroom, but won't get out of the car, repeatedly trying to take the keys out of the ignition and accusing me of not letting her use the bathroom. Then she punched me in the face. My mom still tells me that she wasn't that bad and that old couples fight now and then. I nursed my ex for over a year while he had multiple surgeries which failed for reasons his doctors couldn't figure out. One day he called me selfish because I wouldn't drag myself out of bed for hours before I had to get up for work and go to the store to buy him Fruity Pebbles. I offered to make him something we had at home, but no, it had to Fruity Pebbles. He called me selfish. I lost my temper and he tries to leave. He punched a hole in the bedroom door when I said I was leaving. I left anyway. As I went down the stairs I heard him say that he was going to kill me and then kill himself as he chopped up the front door frame with an axe. Turns out he'd been scraping his surgical incisions back open over and over during the past year so they'd stay open and he'd keep getting OxyContin. While I ran myself ragged taking care of him, working full time, and trying to pay all our bills myself, while handling his on-the-job injury claim. Selfish, right? I split with him. His best friend came over to help him move out. They drank a gallon of Jim Beam, played bloody knuckles until Ein's 9 hand broke, burnt a hole in the carpet, and passed out in his own piss. Before he moved out, I snuck a giant pillow-sized bag of Fruity Pebbles in the truck.